they call garden eggs in on the continent. And I'm sure there's another specific name for that, or Caribbean peppers. So there's all types of little goodies that I kind of put in there. But also with the, as far as the Southern tradition, you'll also find like different types of collards that's from the South. So I've grown some from Georgia. I've grown purple, blue collards. I've grown some from Alabama. So, you know, wherever we are, I try to incorporate those things in every year just to get us, you know, reclaiming who we are as African people here in America and reconnecting us all over the diaspora. So, some of the things I wanted to say before we even talk about harvesting is some of the, what do you need to do before you harvest? What are some of the precautions that you want to take? And one of the main things that I think when I'm thinking about harvesting at my farm is know what I'm going to harvest that day. And that will determine the setup of the farm. Okay, so you know, are you harvesting root vegetables? Are you harvesting leafy greens? Because with a lot of times with farms, a lot of times you're not, depending on how large your farm is or your garden, you may not harvest everything on the same day. And sometimes you are harvesting everything on the same day. And so you'll just do your typical setup, but you want to know what are those things that you're going to be harvesting that day, and that will determine what your setup is. And I'll show you what that looks like in the next slide. The other things that we try to do at our farm is what they call GAP, good agricultural practices. And it's basically just the prevention of foodborne illnesses and outbreaks. So, you know how you've been listening to in the news, they just talked about, this is not around vegetables, but there's been a lot of outbreaks around vegetables. But I just read this morning about an outbreak with ice cream. And there was a listeria, I think I'm saying it right, listeria outbreak. And so they voluntarily are pulling some of these ice creams off the, oops, somebody may have to mute themselves. Um, thank you. But before, so in a part of the good agricultural practices is making sure that you sanitize everything. So you want to make sure that you're sanitizing the knives, the bins, the tables that you're placing everything on, salad spinner, anything that your food is going to come into contact with, you want to make sure that you are sanitizing those. And so we use Simple Green because that's some of the things that are used in organic farming. Um, and so, yeah, so we use Simple Green. There are other things that people usually will mix together and, you know, kind of spray on their surfaces. Those are a little bit more high tech, and I am a little bit more nervous about them. But you spray it and then you kind of let it dry, and it's supposed to take care of everything. Um, Another thing I want to just really point out again with GAP, and let me just put the disclaimer out there. I just thought I forgot to say this. I am just mentioning some of the practices with the good agricultural practices GAP. You really are going to want to go to the, you know, the FDA and the USDA website to learn more about this and even take some training, because I've had some training in this. And so I'm not mentioning every single thing. This is not like an exhaustive list. This is just a few basic precautions that you want to use when you're harvesting. Um, and so I said on here, if you are sick, you do not want to harvest. If you, so you're gonna have to find something else to do, have someone else to take over that particular job, because you really don't want to be, you know, passing on anything onto the food and passing it to other people and making them sick. So remember, our goal is to not pass on any foodborne illnesses. Another thing is that if you get cut or if you have a scratch, you need to tend to it right away, and you need to either cover it with a Band-Aid and then put a glove on. So that's typically what we'll do. We'll, you know, if it's on your hand, put a Band-Aid on, you know, clean it up, obviously. And then, you know, anything that has blood on it or that you may have come in contact with, then all of those things that you harvested that you think you may have had blood in contact with, you will no longer, you know, keep that. That will have to be, you know, thrown away. Um, The other thing, like if it's your arm or your leg, then you can, put a bandage on it and then cover it with your, shirt or jacket. But you're gonna have to cover it with something. You don't want that to be in contact with any of your food. Some of the other things is I put on here about quick gap. So again, the official definition for gap from the Food and Drug Administration is to minimize microbial food safety hazards for fresh fruits and vegetables. So some of the precautions again before you even harvest is in the field. Do you have clean potable water? Does it look clean? Has it been tested? If you're using well water, making sure that nothing is being going to be on your foods that can then people ingest and take into their bodies and make them sick. A real big one, do not harvest anything with feces on it or urine, anything from an animal, from humans or animals. And if it's on your gloves, do not keep the produce you touched with those gloves. You know what I mean? So if you ended up touching something and you realized that there was feces on your gloves, you pretty much gonna have to get rid of that. Okay, because you don't really want to risk anyone else getting sick, or worse, you taking that produce like lettuce and putting it in water, and then that feces is swirling around in there, and then you're cleaning other produce with it, and then now everything that you harvested that day becomes contaminated. So I have a picture down here at the bottom with a tomato that has feces on it. And so typically, if I see a tomato like that, I actually don't, if I'm harvesting that day, I won't remove it. I'll just leave it where it is because I don't want to accidentally get it on my clothes or on my gloves or drop it into whatever bucket or bin that I'm using. And so I'll just leave it there and just try to keep a note of it and come back and deal with it later. But some of the ways that you can have contact with, feces or urine is birds on power lines. I have that at our farm where we actually have power lines and the birds are kind of dropping things. So we have to either, grow not in those particular areas or put some type of covering on or be very, very, pay attention. Okay. Pay attention to everything that's happening. Another big one, if you drop something on the ground, do not put it in your harvest bin. Now, this is something we tell our kids all the time. Like if you drop something on the floor, don't put it in your mouth, right? So it's the same kind of concept here, kind of like a common sense thing. But sometimes, especially if you're down to the wire and you don't have a lot because maybe, frost came in, you may get a little bit desperate, but whatever you do, try to just say to yourself, like, no, it's not worth it. I don't want other people to get sick. And again, make some common sense things, just making sure your clothes, the gloves that you are using are clean, making sure that you have the proper restrooms, like porta potties and a hand washing station in your area so that you can, kind of constantly wash your hands in between harvesting, or if you happen to sneeze or touch your head or what have you, you can have somewhere to wash your hands. On the right, this is something we actually use, except for the wooden little piece, we actually use this like camping washing station. And we have our little soap there. We have a bucket at the bottom as opposed to like their little pail, but we have a bucket at the bottom to capture the water. And then we have a trash bin nearby so that you can throw away your napkins. So nothing is going, onto the ground or contaminating. And it's near our harvest area, but not so close that if for some reason that bucket of water spills over, it'll contaminate what it is that we're harvesting. And then on the left is something that I thought was really interesting, that I believe this was in South Africa. No, it was in Ghana. I'm sorry. It was in Ghana. And this was a setup that I thought was really interesting. So I thought I'd put them both in.
Sophia, really quick question. When it comes to produce that has animal feces, or maybe it's dirty, if you are not trying to sell that, let's say it's your own consumption. I know that sometimes folks just like, well, just wash it off. I guess, what is your take on like produce that you just eat for yourself, maybe share with friends, and the difference of having to sell that and practices around just cleaning, produce that falls to the floor even.
Right. Well, I'm glad that you said that because I actually meant to mention that because I know that we do have a mix of farmers and gardeners, and most of the things that I'll talk about is from a farming standpoint. But before I was a farmer, I had been gardening in my own, backyard and still do actually. And my take, I personally, if it's species on it, I wouldn't use it, me personally. Now, if I drop it on the ground at my house, I probably will, wash it with something in my house and be okay with that. Um, but feces, I never did. I will admit that I never did the feces. I couldn't get down with it. I was just too nervous. At the time, my kids were really young too, so I was just too nervous. So I just never did that. But if something, dropped in the grass, I usually didn't worry about it too much because I really don't have a lot of power lines. So, and in my mind, there's not a lot of animals, but now I know I actually have a lot of animals coming through my yard. So I don't know. I may actually change that. But I will say that, yeah, I've dropped something and was like, okay, but I never do that with anything with the farm because I know that I'm selling it to other people. And it's one thing for like me to get sick. And be honest, I don't even serve it to my kids. I might do that for even me. I might be out in the garden, drop a tomato and pick it up and rinse it off with my stuff and pop it in. But I definitely really don't do that with my kids. So I have to be honest with that one too. But for you, it's really about, I don't want to tell somebody what they shouldn't or should do at their own home. I know some people probably just chop their tomato in half and just eat the good half. But me personally, I just don't even want to play with it. Anybody who's ever gotten food poisoning, this is much worse than food poisoning. You could actually die. So, any other questions before I move to the next slide? Okay. So here is our real life pre-harvest setup. So, we set everything up. We have our tent, we have tables. You see, we have bins and our cooler out, salad spinner, everything that we need for that day. Rubber bands, everything is sitting out. Everything has been sanitized and cleaned for that day. And so we basically created our own wash pack station. So if you have a farm, having like 2 bins of water set up and then an area where things can kind of dry, it's something good. When I was in my backyard, I just had a bowl with some water. Sometimes I would just have the bin and just kind of cover the bin, and then if I knew it's going to be quick, then I'll just bring it in the house. It just really all depend on how long I was going to be out there. um, so I have everything nice and clean and set up. This tent, you're seeing it without its shade cloth, but we actually have like little side walls that are shade cloth. But we have everything out there, our containers, both scales. We have a digital and a suitcase scale. Any harvest tools, whatever we have is all sitting out there, including our harvest logs. And the harvest log is just a record that you have of, everything that you're harvesting that day, how many pounds you harvested, how many quantities, especially is important, like when you're doing a CSA like myself, which I forgot to mention, didn't I? So I have a CSA, meaning that I have a weekly, excuse me, I have a weekly, vegetable box that goes out. And so we need to know, okay, we have, 30 customers this week. And so we need 30 bunches of greens. And so this just kind of helps us know, okay, we need 30 bunches this week. Next week, we just need 25, you know. So it has the items, what you're harvesting, where it's going. So is this for the CSA? Are you donating it? Is it going to a farmer's market? Just so we can kind of keep everything straight. If you're at your home, you don't necessarily have to go through that. But I think that it's really exciting to kind of get into the habit of doing that, just to see how many pounds you had, just, for some fun for yourself. And if you have children, they like to know. Or if you're at a community garden, it's really nice to say, hey, we grew 800 pounds of, vegetables this year. And that's really exciting to see that. Let me see what else I see in here. Oh, the other thing you'll see is with our wash pack station, you'll see all around it is grass, but then you'll see under this table where you see our little shade cloth, you'll see we have wood chips. So we have something down there just in case, like if it's raining or any, it's wet in there so that our feet won't get too wet. We're not sloshing around in there. Just bringing on any other potential issues that may come up because the area is wet. Um, yeah, so some people have wood chips, some people have, like crushed rocks. I really like the rocks to be honest too, because I really feel like I'm on top of anything. But you just don't want to be in a dirty, muddy situation with your containers and everything. And you'll kind of see that a little bit later. Like if you look on the ground, you'll see that we have some containers kind of sitting under those tables. And just imagine if it was just sitting on soil, they'd get really, really muddy really fast. So a few harvesting tips before I really get into some of the tools. The best time to harvest is earlier in the day, before it's really sunny and hot. I like to say before noon, that's usually the average. Or you can harvest later in the day when the temperatures are lower and the sun is going down. And I'll kind of talk about why that is, and I think it's the next slide. Alternatively, it's going to be a hot day at some point, July, August. You're not going to really escape it. You try to get up early and get there like 5, 6 in the morning, and by 7, it's like 80 degrees. So a lot of times you can't even really avoid it. And so at that point, you have to kind of choose. What am I going to harvest? What is going to be able to sit in warmer temperatures. And so typically what we do is we'll harvest like all of our delicate things or greens. We'll do those things while it's cooler outside. So, 6, 7 in the morning. And then the other things that can kind of sit, I guess, in the warmth a little bit without, going limp would be like our root vegetables or our fruiting crops like tomatoes and eggplants and peppers. So we'll have those things. We'll kind of choose. We'll do those first, and then have them cool down, and then we'll move on to the next. Let me see. Now, of course, when you harvest anything, you really want to make sure that everything is mature before you harvest it. But sometimes, you're harvesting things and they're baby stage because maybe a restaurant, likes it because it's tender, or you want to just do baby greens. But sometimes there are exceptions to waiting until your vegetables are totally mature. So sometimes you're harvesting green tomatoes, right? And I mean, not the ones that are green and then they're ripe and they're still green. I'm just talking about the ones like the ones at the bottom you're seeing, like these cherry tomatoes that are they're green and they're really unripened. Because in my community, the African American community, we like fried green tomatoes, right? Especially in the South. We love fried green tomatoes. And so people like them raw. So there's that exception. But also, sometimes I may harvest the tomatoes when they're kind of red, but still a little bit green. And that way, when it comes to you, it won't have any kind of like indentations in it. It won't split by accident. Sometimes I'm harvesting early because there's a rain and I'm concerned that we're near ripening, and tomatoes have a tendency to take up a lot of water in the split. So I may harvest them a little bit early for that. And sometimes I'm harvesting them a little bit early because I know that they're gonna kind of sit in your house. You may not eat them right away, and that way, they won't rot on you right away. So that's just me thinking about, what are people doing? The other thing is trimming away any leaves and roots and soil, while you're out in the field, and try to bring as little like soil and, leaves and all of that stuff. Try to process that out there. Okay. And then once you harvest everything, keep everything out of the sun. Okay. Trust me, you do not want your stuff just sitting out there in the sun because it will wilt on you so fast, especially in, later in July and August and early September. So here are some of our harvesting tools. So over to the left is actually one of my favorite tools, which is this 6-inch machete. This is actually newer for our farm. I love it. When my family temporarily lived in Ghana, the men would be out there with the machetes, the women would be out there with the machetes. And I wasn't, I was like, whoa, that looks like something. And but I didn't really know how useful of a tool it was until I started using it last season, and I love it. And so if you look below, you'll see my son when he was 12 years old harvesting arugula, and he actually cut himself, not with this machete though. He had a smaller knife and he cut himself. So we did the process, like I said, we bandaged him up. It was like a little scratch, but I didn't want any blood on anything. And then we put a glove on, and then he continued harvesting. But this machete is really good at cutting a lot of greens in a short amount of time. You can also use, it's like harvest, I forget what they call them, greens harvesters that they have out here. I think even on YouTube they have how to make your own that'll do it, within seconds, like half the bed in a couple of seconds or something like that. But us, we pretty much use hand tools. The next picture you'll see is a pruner, which is really good for the eggplant. You'll see me down here with eggplants. I like to use it on tomatoes, sometimes peppers. I'm trying to think, what else do I use it on? Oh my goodness, I use the pruners on a lot of different stuff. Those are the things that's coming to mind right now. And then you'll see in the middle, I have these gloves. That's part of your harvesting tools. So you want to make sure you have some really clean gloves. If you're at your house, you can go with gloves or without gloves. But I really like having some gloves on, depending on what it is that I'm harvesting. Sometimes I'm like, you'll see me down here with gloves on with the eggplant, and that's because eggplant have little pricklies on it, and I don't like to be stuck. And I got stuck real good, and I learned, oh, I'm gonna put some gloves on. And so you'll see I have at least 2 pairs. I have well more than this. So any farm and gardener know we have like all kinds of gloves. So I have the ones on the left that are for prickly things, and then I have the one on the right, like if I'm dealing with anything wet, like leafy greens or what else? Spinach, arugula, that kind of stuff. And then off to the right, you'll see that we have this fork here, and I put the carrots. So I like to use this fork to really loosen it up. Like with the carrots, you can kind of pull them out of the ground, but depending on how long they are, I've had that issue where you try to pull it up, but then only get is like half a carrot and it breaks in half. So having this fork kind of loosens the soil for you so that you can kind of pull it out. And so I like to use that for like carrots and potatoes. What else did I think? Carrots, potatoes, onions. I like to use it on my green onions or even my yellow and purple onions or red onions to kind of get them, because sometimes the roots get really long and get stuck. So that's really nice to use. You can even use it for straw bale, y'all. For your pathways. It's really nice tool. It's a multiple use tool. I have on here harvesting tool. You see the woman with her hands in the air, and that just stands for you can also harvest with your hands, right? So you'll see I have an intern down here pulling out turnips out of the beds with her hands and her gloves. And then you can do that with your beets, radishes. Let's see, beets, radishes. I said turnips already. So those are just a few examples. In the middle is another harvest knife that is specifically for lettuce greens. You can use it for other things, but it's specifically for lettuce heads. And you'll see that it has like 2 sharp edges. And what I really love about this particular tool is that you can take that one little triangular edge and just turn your leaf, your head lettuce onto the side just a little bit, and it'll kind of cut like right into that stem and cut it very clean. And so so you can use it too. You can either slice with it or you can kind of poke and cut with it. And I love that. And sometimes I'll use it on my arugula and poke and cut with it. Or if I'm doing like cilantro or not basil, but cilantro or parsley, I'll use that little edge. So it's really nice for that. Um, and then off to the right, you'll see we have with these little like micro snips, I think they call it a micro snip. I really enjoy using those with my herbs. I'll be honest. I love them with my herbs. Uh, Sometimes I use it on my, cherry tomatoes, but very rarely. Usually I just pull them with my hand. But this one, I like using it, like I said, for like a lot of your herbs. And it's really nice because sometimes your pruners can kind of get in your way, kind of get in your way. And so I'll use something like really tiny, or if it gets really bushy and I only want to do so much, I can really go in there and do a surgical cut. Some other harvesting tools that we use is you'll see these like little totes. You'll see it where the onions are in it. You'll see where there's a scale and there's a tote that we're using. And I really like to use those kind of totes that you use at home, that you have at home, that you put clothes in, that you put toys and stuff in, or for storage, because they're really large and they hold a lot. Again, like if you're at home, you may just only use what's in the middle up here, this little tub or trug as they call it. That's really simple. It's not even hard. If you, I don't know how to describe it, but it's malleable. So it's really easy to carry around. It doesn't stay open like that. And I really love that. And so usually I'll use those for like greens. Yeah, a lot of greens. Not the big greens like lettuce greens. That's what I should say, like lettuce greens or spinach, that sort of thing. Um, Let me see. Then off to the right at the top, right, you'll see Swiss chard, and that what you're looking into is actually our cooler. And so that to me is considered part of your harvesting because when you bring things out of the field, you're going to want to eventually cool them down. And so we have this cooler here. And if you look, you'll see like something little silver in between there. And that's just putting a layer between like either ice or ice packs or whatever it is you're using. It puts a layer between the ice and your greens. Um, and that way you won't get any like cold burns on your greens and stuff like that. And so I actually got this because through the pandemic, everybody was kind of getting that home delivery, and we were getting these a whole bunch of these from Whole Foods, Whole Food delivery. And I was like, man, this is really nice. And I really, sanitize them really well. I was like, and it kept things really cold and kept water from touching the greens. And so I was able to repurpose them because I was so concerned about putting them in the landfill because we were getting a lot of them. It was like they was putting everything in them. And I was like, oh my goodness, how can we repurpose these? And that's what I got this idea to do that. You'll see that we have scales here, digital scales. You don't have to plug these in. They are battery operated and they're rechargeable. And so they have them in different sizes. Some weigh up to 40, take up to 40 pounds of weight, 80 pounds. It just depends. I did not put the picture of a suitcase scale on here, which is more of a manual scale, but that one takes on more weight. And so I just wanted to put that out there. And then all the way, well, I'll go back to the middle where you're seeing, I don't know if you could tell that's spinach, but this man is using a Johnny's knife, this little tiny knife. I actually have that. And I really love using that knife, for greens. But as you can see, it's kind of small. And so that's really if you want like a precision cut. Um, but I like to use a machete now. I didn't moved on from this little tiny knife, but it's really sharp. It's really great with precision. And yeah, and if you're a home gardener, you would probably really love it because I use it at home a whole lot. Now shift your eyes all the way to the right again and at the bottom, and you'll see this table here with holes in it. And this is actually a wash pack station that I used when I was an incubator farmer for Windy City Harvest. And I really love this table. And I'm sorry, I forgot to get the name of the table, but I know it's at Farm Tech. Uh, so you can get it at Farm Tech. And I really love this because, after washing things, we can kind of sit them out a little bit and let them air dry under shade. There's a cover that you can't see, a roof that's over that. And it kind of dried them out before we would, put them into something else, the next bin that we were going to use before we took it to be refrigerated or took it to a farmer's market or pack them into a CSA bag.
Really quickly, there's a question on the chat if you use a dunk tank for cleaning. Two questions.
I don't know, not a traditional dunk tank. If I think I know what you're talking about. Not the traditional one. These bins that you're seeing down here with the greens in it, it's basically just two black bins with water in it. And we usually put like ice or water bottles that we froze, that are clean, that we froze, and those become like our reusable to keep the water cold when it gets really hot. But that's what we use. We use something really, really simple. Yeah.
And the follow-up question is just how much growing space do you have?
Oh my gosh. It's probably right now, it's probably about 1/8 of an acre. So yeah, that sounds about right. And the reason why I do that is because, we've added on to the beds. And I think the last time we measured, it was about 1/8 of an acre, but we're always kind of adding to our space. So we're growing when we can. I think we're out of space though now. I just wanted to throw this in here about caring for your tools. Somebody actually kind of mentioned this on Facebook, and it made me think like, yes, I need to put that in there because, I was just going to kind of say it, but I think putting it in here is really good about keeping your tools clean and dry so that they don't get really rusty. Keeping them in some kind of a storage because a lot of times folks are kind of leaving them outdoors and they're getting kind of funky, but you got to think about it. You don't want any kind of diseases or anything just being on there. You definitely don't want to get rust in anybody's food. And so, just having a proper place for them to go is really nice. At the bottom, you'll see that we have like two different storage bags, and these are literally bags that we have where we keep our harvest tools. So the orange one, we put our harvest tools in there. And I really like the orange because it reminds my kids that everything is sharp. Everything, there's something sharp in there. So they don't just stick their hand in it. That's the reason why I like it being brightly colored. And then the other one is for just our, typical farm stuff like screwdrivers and, any kind of, rotary knives or anything like that. That's all in that bag. So we keep our stuff separate so that, to keep the tools clean, and that when we harvest and if we cleaning them at the end of the day, usually the next day we don't have to clean them. But if we would have stuck them in this bag with all these other tools, then I mean, okay, I cleaned it the day before, now I got to clean it again. So we trying to, kind of cut out some steps. And a lot of people say to store your tools in sand. And apparently it really works to keep everything, in order. I have not done it. I will admit that. But I put that in there just because a lot of people really swear by storing your stuff in sand and keeping everything kind of sharp. And then I have this one general picture here that has a metal file just to keep, all of your tools sharp. Because, just like when you're cooking in the kitchen, if your, knives are not sharp, it's really a pain, right? It's really a pain to cut your tomatoes or onions with that blunt blade. And so they have this metal file, wire brush. There are some that you can get from like Johnny's or Farm Tech or any of these garden stores that have their own little files on it. And then, some kind of oil to just kind of oil your stuff down and keep it, looking shiny and new. And of course, soap, rags. It's kind of like ditto with that. And now we get to the fun part that I know everybody really wants to hear. They don't want to hear about cleaning tools. Post-harvest handling. Ooh, why do we do that? Why do we call it that? Because we want to remove field heat. people do not realize that the minute you cut your produce, it starts to deteriorate, right? It's losing all of this water, and then it's all of this heat that's being held into it. And so you want to remove that. And the reason why I say this is if you look at the bottom, I'm sure y'all already noticed, but I'm gonna point it out anyway. So you'll look on the left and you'll see these beautiful kale greens, and on the right, you'll see these collards. Those collards are not mine. Those collards are from a store. And I'm not gonna mention the store unless you ask me. But this is a store, and this is recently. And I was like, this is perfect for my presentation. What your greens would look like if you do not remove the field heat, if you do not do these things. And I'll get more into how you remove the field heat, but they're gonna look limp and dead. And them, I guess they thought, store temperature was great. No, store temperature was not great because those greens were horrible. So like I said, so part of the reason why you do post-harvest handling is to remove some of the field heat, to clean some of the soil off, some of the bugs off, making sure you get rid of all your dead leaves and stuff. You should have already done that in the field. If you haven't, you're going to want to do that now, because those dead leaves are just going to speed up that process, okay, of everything, going downhill for you. And I just noticed if you take all that off, that gives your produce a good fighting chance of, making it to wherever its intended home is. So whether it's out in the community or, you making it to your refrigerator, right? And so part of the post-harvest handling is making sure that you have some type of shade. And so you'll see again, we have our tent here. We have side walls for when, the sun is coming in a certain direction, because like I said, it will start to make your stuff go limp really quickly, that sun. The next thing we have is a way of cooling everything down. And so for us, most things, not all things, but most things are going to be dumped. So like all of our leafy greens are definitely going to be dumped. Um, Sometimes we'll dump our like turnips and beets, mainly because we have the leafy greens, but sometimes we'll just kind of wipe the soil off so that it can, preserve on its own, and just dump the leaves, just so we can get, again, some of the insects off and a lot of that soil, and to help it cool down. So just make sure, I lost what I was gonna say. It'll come back to me. So some of the things that we also use to cool, I kind of mentioned earlier, but I mentioned ice, reusable freeze packs. I can kind of show y'all what that looks like. I think I have a picture in here, but I also have a live if you want to see it. And then we've also did something that another farmer actually told us about at a farmer's market. And she was like, hey, we use these frozen water bottles. And so they were using them to keep their produce, going well at the market. But also we found that we can put them into our water, and we wouldn't have to constantly keep going out and buying ice on a weekly basis. And then you want to make sure after you've cooled everything, then you want to make sure everything is dry, you know, because if it's just sitting in water, it's going to die usually, right? There's some things that can sit in water, and I'll kind of talk about that next. But if you look all the way over to the right, you'll see the young man. He's a Windy City Harvard student. So I grabbed this from my alma mater and showed how he's dunking his greens into some water, and then kind of shaking it off a little bit and putting it in the salad spinner. And that's just to make sure everything gets bone dry, right? Before you put it into a bag. Because if you put it in that bag and water is just sitting at the bottom, it's probably not going to make it, you know, to the next person, or their stuff is going to, rot sooner. And nobody wants to hear, somebody out in the community, customers saying, hey, my stuff rotted in like a day or two because it's been sitting in water. So I have different types of salad spinners up here. You'll see the orange commercial one, but then you'll see some of your home ones. And I've used this in my home. I have like a home salad spinner, and then I have two commercial salad spinners. And what's really nice is these baskets actually come out of the salad spinner. and you can, dunk it and put it into something else when you're done. Let me check my time. Oh, goodness. Okay, I'm almost done, y'all. So I'm gonna speed it up. So with storage, again, just keeping things cool and dry. You want to keep things out of the sun. We already mentioned that. And keeping things at the ultimate temperature. So on the left side, you'll just see some of the greens and some of the vegetables and some of their best temperatures. Um, so with me, we have a home refrigerator for our farm that we only use it. Sorry, I don't know how I did that. Only use it for our farm produce and refrigerate for that. We also but we don't have a portable, well, we have a cooler, so we also have a cooler that we can put things in, and this particular cooler retains ice for 6 days. And so we've noticed that it's certain things that we can leave in there. We won't do it for 6 days. Usually it's like overnight. Like if we find that we're at the height of the season and everything can't fit in our refrigerator, sometimes we have to leave them in the cooler. And so the things that we know will be okay, but needs something cool, we'll put them in the cooler. But there's people that have walk-in coolers. Some people have containers converted into a cooler. And that's one of the things that we have at Urban Growers Collective. They have a container that you can kind of walk in cooler. There's outdoor refrigerators. There's a lot of people that are setting up cool bots. Connecting it to a air conditioner, and that is cooling your items, and then refrigerated trucks. So, but then there's some things don't need all of that, and so you'll see that basil and asparagus can actually just sit in water. So you can put it in a gallon bucket or a vase. I've noticed that with sage and thyme, we're real good. If I just wrap it really, really tightly and no air, they can be refrigerated. And then things like potatoes and onions, a lot of times they need to dry out. You know what I mean? Knock some of the soil off, but you're not going to dunk it in anything. And they just need to dry out, make it sit out. Woo. So processing. So I'm not going to read everything. I think you all are probably already reading it. But some of the things that we do with our produce so that it doesn't go to waste is we ferment. Ferment the vegetables, freeze them, cut them up, blanch them, put them in a freezer bag. A lot of times I like to fully cook everything and put it in a freezer bag and then put it in my freezer. Pickling, making pickles, cucumbers, using your cucumbers and pickling them. We like to pickle the cucumbers and beets and goodness. I'm trying to think of all the things I've pickled before. It's not coming to me, but another thing is some things can just sit out on the cabinet, like I mentioned earlier, like your potatoes, your tomatoes, your storage onions, not the green onions. Those need to be refrigerated, but you can leave out your storage onions. Certain herbs can sit out in water, and like your squash can sit out. Typically, especially if it's larger, because a lot of times you got those big boulders. That's what I call them. Those can sit out. Usually, when they're a little bit more tender, they might be able to sit out overnight if your house isn't like very hot. Like if you got on central air, then you may be okay. If you have a warm house and you're just using a house fan, you're going to want to refrigerate that. Canning. You'll see, this is some of my products down here. Canning. So we do a lot of canning in our house, water bath. And then dehydration or drying. So these are real-time calendula flowers that I was able to harvest from Multiple Harvests, which is my friend Beatrice's farm. And then I brought them home, and I have like a little dryer, little mesh dryer that they dry on. And I also have a dehydrator, so I can dehydrate things. But you don't even really have to have any of those things. You can just air dry them or hang them up, wrap some twine around it, hang it up from your wall. I've done that. Or oven dried, done that too. And then, yay, here's some of the resources that we have. Just some of the books. So if you want to learn how to harvest and you need, more hands-on, there's classes that you can take. There's books and videos. So, one of my favorites is Soul Fire Farm. She really has a whole series on their website. Some of the tools, like if you don't have some of these tools, or you're like wondering, do I like them? Do I not like them? You can actually rent some tools from or check out some tools. It's actually Chicago Tool Library has free tools that you can rent. And they do ask for you to make a small donation, but you can either make a small donation or I think nothing at all. And they will allow you to borrow tools. It's really simple, really easy, and they're not too far. And I've used them, so check them out. Um, let me see. If you want to do some hands-on harvesting, if you're not at a community garden or have a friend or not able to practice in your own yard, here's some places that you can learn. Going to the Buds Conference that goes on every year, the Black Urban Farmers and Growers Conference, Urban Growers Collective have a lot of classes. Windy City Harvest, Moses has different tracks for people, you know, who are novice to all the way up to people who like want to use big machinery, how to use that. And then I put down the Green Lots Project. A friend of mine, Pancho McFarland, does a lot of great stuff at community garden level. If you want to learn, he has some fun tools for you. And then I just put on here, if you want to learn how to grow your own food, here's some places. You can intern with us if you like. And over time, you get to use a lot of these fun tools. And then that's all I have. I think that's
There are some questions on the chat that we can go over, and thank you all that have been providing answers. So one of the questions is, do you have any recommendations on solutions to use to wash your veggies when people get their CSA boxes at home? And then what kind of home salad dinner do you suggest?
Let me see. There we go. So wait a minute. Say that again. So when they get their CSA boxes, what?
Yeah, any solutions that you recommend for them to wash their veggies? Any recommendations for home salad spinners?
The salad spinner I got at Costco. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I've had it for so long. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was just I've used like many different ones, so pretty much whatever one you really like. But just know that some of them are not as robust, so I like the one that you just kind of push on it and it spins. I like those the most versus the one where you kind of gotta do a lever thing because the levers have a tendency to break. When you get home, I just say what you usually do because some people are going to use a little soap, some people are going to do some vinegar. I see Chef Mel showing her salad spinner. Thank you. I didn't think to bring mine out, my home one out. Yeah, typically what you use is the big thing is just making sure everything is dry as possible. And you know, getting all of the air out if you're putting it in a bag or something like that, making sure you get all of that air out. I know every farm is different, but us, we usually try to, it's not, we don't suggest you eat everything like, you know, after we clean it because we try our best to clean it the best that we can. But I will say that a lot of times we've already kind of got a lot of the bugs and the soil off typically. And so it's just you kind of cleaning it right before you need to eat it. So usually you could just take it from our farm and store it in your refrigerator. And then when you're actually ready to eat it, then you'll, you know, go that extra step and clean it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Are there any more questions? Any other comments for Sophia while we have her in her great wisdom and knowledge? Go ahead.
Hey, Sophia.
Hey.
I was just going to apologize for being so late, but I actually dozed off. So,
You're fine, Chef.
Yeah, I was really tired. And just to piggyback off the person about washing, I was going to say, I don't use any solution, especially for when I get my stuff from places like Sophia and other small farms, and I know everybody takes care. I just use water. Like if I'm, like she says, take it out the bag. Sometimes I eat it right out the bag when it's from a farm that use organic practices. But sometimes I'm like right out in the field or whatever, just picking and eating. But I would just use some cold water to just snap it back to life and a little sea salt or something. But you don't want to be putting anything extra on it. My cousin was at my house from out of town and I saw her picking up some dish soap. I said, oh no, you're trying to poison the whole family. So I, so never use no soap or nothing, but just rinse a little cold water to snap it back to life.
Yeah, usually just a little cold water is all you need. Oh, I see Mama Yvonne.
Hi, dear. I'm
Hi.
sorry I was late too. We had a little family drama. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to see some of the previous information later on the recording or something. But I was wondering, do you have to do more than wash it to make sure that those bugs don't accumulate in your refrigerator?
Oh, were you talking about if you're at home?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. If you're at home, then you're probably gonna wanna, rub them a little bit. Like if there's aphids. I mean, typically, I don't want to have to deal with all those aphids, so I kind of,
Those little
don't
tiny bugs.
Yeah, I don't want to have to deal with them. So personally, I just kind of leave them where they're at. But if there's like a few, then I'll deal with them. Because a lot of times when you just put them in the water, they start to float. And then all you have to do is kind of rub the greens or rub whatever it is, and they'll come right off. Or you just made me think about it. I forgot to show you guys. I have like a little attachment that I like to use on my hose, and and you can just turn it and it'll zero in, and I can get bugs off that way too. So I'll do it right there out in the field before I even bring them in the house. And I used to do that even when I was in my backyard. I'll just spray it, put it on that high setting and spray it, and it'll knock all those bugs out. And of course, you still kind of got to bring it in and make sure everything is off. But that's how I typically do it, by hand. And that's the reason why I tell everybody, like, yes, we clean things, but we are doing it by hand. We can miss some stuff. So, you're fine to put it in your refrigerator when it leaves us, but just know before you consume it to, clean it again and check for bugs and all that good stuff.
That's such a great point, Sophia. Well, I know that we're running up on 6 o'clock. So I want to say thank you all for being here and for listening to Sophia and her wonderful wisdom. We are asking SAUA to consider making a small donation to us, these workshops to grow with us. We do compensate the growers. And so any donations that we receive will go directly to the grower. So we highly encourage you all to make a donation. When I send out the recording and all the resources, I'll include a link for the donation as well. And I just want to say thank you, Sophia, for being here with us. This was amazing. As a grower myself, I'm always learning, and I love that I get to learn from you. And Sophia and I grow next to each other. So I'm always like, Sophia, how do I do this? Teach me this.
We're farm neighbors.
Yes, we're farm neighbors. Any chance I can get to learn from Sophia is such a highlight. Thank you all for being here with us. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening as well.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
I'm getting out there this year.
Yes, come
I'm
on.
vaccinated too, so I can come out.
Yes, please join